good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you very much for joining us for the first in a new series of webinars and podcasts directed at ICEF's network of agents. And also other players in the international student recruitment industry, of course. We had more than 1,100 people register in advance for this webinar, and we're really grateful to those of you who could join us today. Thank you. I'm Cann, I'm the Director for the Americas at ICEF, and I have the honor of hosting this webinar at what is a very difficult and important time for our industry. It's hard to imagine facing a more intense set of challenges than those we're currently seeing. In the space of just 2 months, the international education industry has had to face up to a considerable threat brought about by this global pandemic. Education providers and agents everywhere are now grappling with enormous challenges which a short time ago were simply unthinkable. And at ICEF, we are in a position that enables us to communicate daily with both institutions and agents, and we've been inspired to see our partners innovating and exploring new paths. And although we are all being severely tested, we are also coming together and identifying new solutions, not only for now, but also for a post-coronavirus future. So aside from the ongoing coverage of this situation and its ramifications, which we've been covering in our news portal ICEF Monitor, we felt that it would be really useful to continue to provide a platform for dialogue between institutions and agents. After all, this is something that ICEF has already been doing for nearly 3 decades. And so we have now initiated a series of webinars and podcasts in order to offer you insights from student mobility professionals on both sides of the conversation. So next week, we'll be launching the ICEF Exchange, which is a new industry podcast, which will regularly address the issues impacting international education, drawing on real examples and based on conversations with your international peers. In the upcoming webinars and podcasts, we'll be interviewing agents for their perspectives, talking to associations and government organizations, as well as speaking with education providers and business owners on the many different ways they're adapting to our new normal. So please stay tuned for all of those, and also make sure you're following us on Instagram at ICEF Global and staying up to date with daily news articles available to you for free at icefmonitor.com, as well as the regular email newsletters, which we urge you to subscribe to. Now, today's topic, it's all about agency-educator relationships, how they can not only survive, but succeed in today's environment, and the impact this will have on enrollments for the immediate future. And we'd really like for this webinar to be a forum for discussion and interaction with those of you who've tuned in. And we trust there's plenty for us to discuss for the best part of an hour, but we will try to keep it within that time frame. So regarding your questions, please send those questions in, or your reactions or your comments, and we'll do our best to put them to our panelists or answer them by text. And you can do that via the Zoom Q&A window, which you should see on your screen. My colleagues will be forwarding the best ones to me on screen if I don't see them, and also via WhatsApp here on another screen. So I'll try and get to as many of those as I can. And please excuse me if I'm looking at various screens and phones at the same time. But please start sending any questions you like. And in the meantime, we'll get things started by introducing today's panelists. Up first, Kirsten Fedeson. She has more than 16 years experience of international higher education. Kirsten provides a variety of perspectives from the industry. After working in Denmark for 10 years, of which 6 were with the country's largest education agency, ERC certified agency EDU Denmark. Today, she's the Senior Director for Global Operations at Northeastern University. Welcome, Kirsten, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Ian.
Next up, Duleep Deosthale, the President of Global Specialists, Inc. and higheredlab.com. Duleep has been active in international education for nearly 3 decades. Most recently, he served as Dean of LIU's Global College in New York. He also served on the boards of various international education organizations, including EAIE, NAFSA, AIEA, and CIEE, and is the recipient of the EAIE President's Award and AIEA's Rutenberg Award. So welcome, Duleep, and thank you too for joining us.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you. You may have noticed a third special guest in the shape of Bryan Gross, who many of you probably know already. Bryan has very graciously agreed to join us at the last minute. For those of you who don't know him, Bryan is the Vice President for Enrollment Management and Marketing at Western New England University in Springfield, Massachusetts, and has served as a member of the Board of Directors for the American International Recruitment Council for more than 5 years. Prior to this role, Bryan was the Associate Vice President for Enrollment Management at St. John's University in New York and the Associate Vice President for Admissions at the University of Bridgeport in Connecticut. So welcome to you, Bryan, as well.
Thank you for having me. It's terrific to be here.
Now, before we go any further, I think it is a really nice idea for us, each of you, I should say, to give us a very short bit of background about yourselves and your institutions, and perhaps how many international students you might be working with roughly at your institution, and how long you've been working with agents, just so that we can get a bit of context for the comments that you'll be making on this webinar. So shall we go in order, starting with you, Kirsten?
Sure, that sounds good. So I'm a relatively recent addition to Northeastern University. I started with them about 6 months ago after a 5-year stint with Southern New Hampshire University. And one of the reasons I was brought in was because the institution a couple of years ago made the decision to move away from a single partner that was helping us recruit for graduate programs and over to a model where we're working directly with agents across the world. So that initiative is still in its early stages. My role within the institution is that I'm overseeing the International Enrollment Management Office, which focuses exclusively on graduate programs at the moment, with the exception of our undergraduate transfer program. And also our global team of consultants. We work with a number of consultants around the world, not agents, but consultants who are working exclusively for Northeastern. So I'm very much on the front lines of enrollment management and how that's impacting us in terms of our relationship with our agents and our international enrollments and so on and so forth. Just touching on your question about the number of students, Ian, based on the official numbers on that were reported last year, in 2019, we had around 16,000 international students in total, which I believe includes all of our students on OPT as well. So that makes us the third largest institution in the country in terms of the number of international students that we're hosting. Brilliant. So that's a little bit of context about Northeastern.
Thank you, Kirsten. Duleep, would you like to go next?
Sure. So I have spent my life, as Ian pointed out, over 3 decades in international education, building universities in different parts of the world and centers. But I'd like to focus a little bit on something which I did over the past few years, and that was develop a startup which was funded by Silicon Valley investors, which focused on bringing artificial intelligence, NLP, natural language processing, and mobile technology to help recruit students for universities. So we developed that, we got funding, and we had over 300 universities that were our partners from across the world. And we were in South Asia, Southeast Asia, and different parts of the Middle East. And we were helping recruit students for university. The company was acquired last year, which was a tremendous feather in the cap. So I bring the experience of both having been on the academic side, university side, and also on the agent side in terms of recruitment, and how technology is going to be a game changer down the road. And it could be used in various ways. So it should not be seen more as a threat, but rather as an ally in terms of where we are going with our recruitment efforts in the future.
Thanks, Duleep. Bryan?
Great. Well, my background, I was fortunate enough to start my career in the international admissions profession at an institution that had the second highest percentage per capita of international students in the country, and spent about 5 or 6 years of my career traveling throughout Asia, working directly with students and families. Here at Western New England, my role as Vice President for Enrollment Management and Marketing, I really try to marry the concepts of admissions, financial aid leveraging, and marketing. We're an institution of about 4,000 total students, and of those 4,000 students, we have a little over 300 students from 30 different countries around the world. And I think contrasting with Kirsten at Northeastern, we're 2 institutions that are in the same state, but have very different profiles in terms of size, and numbers of international students, yet there's a lot of themes that we share in terms of how we go about working with agent partners and recruiting our students. I think the last thing that I'll say that I hope to be able to talk about during this webinar is I've been on the institution's emergency management response team and have been really working to help plan from how we're going to deliver our curriculum, whether it be on campus or online, how we're going to bill students, how we're going to communicate our core messages despite this pandemic. And I think it's really important for participants to understand the impact that COVID-19 has had, particularly on regional private universities like Western New England University.
Thank you, Bryan. And yeah, we're really grateful that you could join us today. So we're looking forward to this conversation. Now, before we get stuck into some of the questions, we thought it would be fun and interesting for us all to run a poll. So we're going to be running actually 2 polls. One is aimed specifically at agencies, and one later on will be run specifically aimed at university and college representatives. So we're going to be starting off with 2 questions aimed just at agents. So please, we ask only the agents to respond. And the 2 questions that I'm going to try and launch now are, firstly, does your agency expect to send students for this fall's intake? And the answer is yes or no, or yes, but with students starting their studies online. And the second question, what are the primary concerns of your students today? And you can have multiple answers, whether it's health, safety, financial insecurity, travel, visa, medium of instruction, online versus in classroom. So I'm just bringing up this poll now, and I'm going to launch it. So you should see that on your screen. Panelists, you will not see that. We'll leave that running for about 20 minutes or so and then come back to it. So, Kirsten, let's start with you, if you don't mind, for the questions. Now, you've mentioned, and I mentioned in your bio, you worked at an agency in Denmark for a long time, and you now find yourself in a leadership position at Northeastern University. Now, I'm very interested to know, how does your experience at an agency shape the way you think and work in your current role in general, but also how that might change or develop, and how does that give you viewpoints on how your work with agents develops in today's COVID-19 world?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Ian. And when you posed it to me the other day, I took a little bit of time to reflect on the different perspectives that I have as a result of that. And I realized that it's not just having been an agent, it's also having been an international student, it's having worked in an institution overseas, having worked in a public university in the US, a private university, having worked as a recruiter, having worked as a leader, seeing this entire puzzle from all the different angles is helping me on a daily basis in the work that I'm doing. Certainly, what I realized as I was thinking about this is that at the end of the day, we are all trying to do the same thing. We're all trying to make sure that students can, pursue educational opportunities that fit their profile, that fits their wishes, that fits their needs, and that fits the institutions, or that are a good fit for the institutions that they're going to. It doesn't matter if you're, a private provider, an agent, a higher education representative, an institutional representative. We're all trying to move these pieces in the same direction. So I think having spent 6 years with an agency and also early on in my career, I'm glad it happened early, because it did give me a different perspective throughout my time here in the US, where I've spent 8 years now since I moved over. And what I often find is that having had that experience always helps me when we are communicating with agents and setting up our policies. And it always being able to see what this looks like from the other side, and understanding again that the other party is not so different from us, always helps our relationship with the other side. It always increases productivity, and it always serves the students best. So when we're, there's something that frustrates us about the other side, and we say, well, they always do this, or I don't understand why they do that. we usually always all have a reason for doing what we do. I've been, again, on the agency side and seen them talk about institutions and say, oh, they're so rigid, or there's all these things they can't do that we want them to do. We also have our reasons for doing so. It doesn't mean that we can't each shift. I think it's just a matter of understanding, you know, how to approach the relationship in a constructive way.
Yeah.
You also asked specifically about how this was impacting my work in terms of COVID. One of the concerns that I have right now, and that I'm trying to wrap my head around how to address, is what's going to happen to some of the smaller agencies, because you know, I came out of a small agency. I find that there's a tremendous value in having a portfolio that is mixed between both large agencies, multi-country agencies, and also the smaller local agencies, because they have a different type of relationship with the students. So I'm looking for ways for us to support all of our agencies, both the big ones and the small ones, and being very mindful of that as we're trying to move forward in a good way under these circumstances.
Right. And so on that note, Kirsten, do you find that when you are accommodating to these new circumstances, that the way your relationship with those agencies changes can sometimes put the balance of the relationship in a different way, so that perhaps the agent is now at a disadvantage, or you're at a disadvantage? Have you begun to notice any patterns in that respect?
I think to some extent we're all at a disadvantage. I think, you know, what I've noticed in this situation, and I was reflecting on that when Bryan said earlier that, you know, he was at the front lines of COVID and trying to figure out how to move forward. The reality is that none of us have been in this situation before, and we don't know exactly what the right course of action is, because if we did, we would all be doing it. I think, you know, as much as we all want to look like we know exactly what we're doing, we're trying to seek strategies, and we're trying to be deliberate. And in that process, sometimes we just throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks.
Yeah.
And then I think the most important thing is to kind of look at it and go, that didn't stick. Let's not do that again. And then let's figure out what to do instead. I think the agents are, you know, we've seen a tremendous amount of support for our agents. I think everyone is looking to find a way to adapt to this. Yeah, I think it's you know, these are the times. I've always been and you and I have given presentations together before, so you know this about me, but I've always been a proponent of building a strong relationship with agents. It's less about having a lot of agents. It's more about having the right agents, and for the agents to have the right institutions, and to have someone that you can build that relationship with. And those relationships are the ones that benefit us now, because now we're sticking together because we know each other and we've worked together for a long time, and we're going to find a way to make this work. So it's, yeah, we're I think certainly we're all at a disadvantage. I think the concern with agencies is that because this is such a low risk, from my perspective, way of recruiting international students, because the agents do not get paid, as we all know, until the students have enrolled. That is the very thing that is disadvantaging them now. So we're trying to account for that and accommodate that to whatever extent we can.
Yeah, thanks, Kirsten. And maybe I can put this to both Duleep and to Bryan as well. If you feel that there's anything that you need to do to rethink, or that we need to do to rethink the relationship in this new circumstance, or do you just feel it's a case of learning by doing as well, and seeing what sticks, as Kirsten said?
Yes, I mean, what Kirsten said, but I would just like to add, I mean, each university, as we move forward, will be looking at, you know, what are the models they are going to adopt for their own circumstances, depending on where they are located, what their focus is, and everything along those lines. So what becomes important for the agent is to understand that. So there has to be tremendous clarity between the institution and your partner, in this case, the agent, as the information flows. And that, I think, is going to be one of the very, very crucial things for both sides to be able to understand how to share that. They are your partner now. This is like a private-public partnership. You are going to grow together as has been pointed out. It is about relevancy. I mean, your being relevant is also their being relevant, because that is how the relevancy of the international arena is going to be. If any one of those pieces, kind of drops the ball, that entire space is gone. So I think the thing that I want to emphasize is to look at it as a much closer relationship building in terms of clarity, continuity, commitment. All these kinds of things will become pretty central in terms of as we move forward. Bryan?
Yeah, I would like to provide a frame to what I see happening right now, in the United States. And I'll say pre-COVID-19, you could think about higher education institutions like you think about your own household budget. And you can think about needing to balance your revenue and your expenses. And when your revenue does not equal your expenses, well, you've got to make some changes. So in the United States, for the decade leading up to where we are now, you've had declining demographics in a great part of the country. You've had a decline in college participation rate. You've had a major change in consumer mindset around higher education, which has been really pronounced. You've added, even pre-COVID, the change in NACAC standards, which is the ethical principles that guide the way that US college and universities recruit students. And now you add COVID-19. And what COVID-19 has done for institutions is it's forced most institutions to refund on a prorated basis a good portion of our room and board charges. So in context, most university budgets could range between 20 to 30% of the budget. The revenue comes in through auxiliary expenses. And if you look at expenses for summer revenue or opportunities for summer revenue, COVID-19 has taken away a lot of those revenue opportunities. So US higher education institutions had to, as a result, been a lot more flexible than they've had to before. And I think this is the message for agents that I've had. And some examples of, you've seen nationally institutions lifting standardized testing requirements. They've lifted or changed or altered requirements on their acceptance of AP scores. They've changed the ways in which they're grading current students, moving to pass-fail or credit, no credit. And interestingly enough, it's now the opportunity to Kirsten's point, for agents and US institutions to say, okay, how do we be more flexible with each other? How do we work together to understand what are our common goals? So for an agent, you need to understand, what does a US partner institution expect of you during these times? And then what are the tools that you need to do your job? I think those are two baseline questions. But my message for agents that I hope comes off as optimistic is, US institutions, based on the circumstances that we're facing, we must be flexible. And it's your time to demand that flexibility.
Brilliant, thank you. If I can turn, sorry,
sorry, I just had a quick comment to add to Bryan. So yesterday in a conversation, one of my staff members said to me, "Policy wins the market," and I thought that kind of stuck with me, because to Bryan's point, I think we need to be flexible, excuse me, in terms of our internal policies. This is not the time to stand our ground and say, well, our policies don't allow for this. Like, for instance, if you are awarding a scholarship to students that's higher than normal, make sure this doesn't impact your commission to your agents. If you shift to an online format, even though that's not covered in the contract, if the agent already went through the trouble of recruiting the student, well, should this impact their commission, and so on and so forth. So I think standing firm on your policies is something institutions really have to consider, to make sure that they're not putting themselves and the agents at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kirsten. I'm monitoring some of the questions coming in, and I think we have one here from an institutional representative who is asking us what we can be doing with those students that were coming in due for fall 2020 who now might be deferring, and what we can do to ensure that we don't lose those students, and specifically how our agents can play a role in that process. And I guess any one of you, I would ask to answer that question, if anyone has any ideas for what we can do.
Well, it's interesting. We've conducted some surveys at Western New England University amongst our admitted students across different degree levels. And two of the themes that's coming out of the data that we're receiving is that Our admitted students want to interact with other admitted students, and they want to be able to interact with current students at Western New England University. And so in terms of being nimble, we've had to rethink our summer orientation program. We've launched an online platform, and we've made that an emphasis. Students really have an opportunity to, of course, connect with faculty, to connect with staff, to learn about their degree program, to fill out forms they'll need to fill out. But the most important thing that we're trying to focus on is how could they connect with each other and engage with each other. And we're trying to think very strategically about ways to measure that engagement. So to the guest's question in there, we know that there will be some students that will need to defer their admission, but we want to keep track of our students' level of engagement and making sure that we're engaging as many students as that we possibly can and keeping them engaged, so that if it's not this fall, that it's next spring, and that we're keeping good communication and a good information flow with our students.
And do you feel that, I mean, clearly as an institution, there's a lot you can do and try to do, but do you think that agents have a role to play in that process for the student?
Absolutely huge. I mean, absolutely huge. Your agents need to have access, to your data. They need to understand your goals. They need to understand your vision. It's very important for institutions to keep your agents up to date on institutional decisions. And, I'll just say right now, you see, if you follow the news, Purdue University, Indiana University, Harvard, there's this wave of institutions that are moving forward and saying, we are going to always keep the health and safety of our students first, but we're planning on trying to open. The truth of the matter is that the one thing that we could all be certain of right now is that we don't know what the fall is going to bring. And so being really honest and transparent about what is our vision. At Western New England University, we've been saying we are planning to open, but at the same time, there are factors that may be out of our control. So here's what our backup plan will be if this scenario happens. And so it's this idea of scenario planning and communicating those scenarios to your agents, and of course, getting their feedback.
Yeah, thank you. Great. Kirsten, I wonder if there's anything that you're doing at this time to help your agents answering student inquiries and questions that must be coming into them that perhaps you can't even answer yourselves at this point in time. Is there any to how to deal with that situation? Are you fielding a lot more questions from agents at this time that you've never fielded before?
I mean, it's interesting because I've talked to colleagues at a number of different institutions, and we're all trying to move at the speed of light right now, trying to get there first and get there best, and be the first institution to come out and say, we've got this under control. Here's exactly what we're doing. In that process, many of us are, making or implementing different initiatives and then kind of backfilling all the questions, because as we're launching different initiatives trying to address this, there are inevitably things we will not have thought of. And so what we've done at Northeastern to try to address some of that is, first of all, continuously, we've got a whole group of people dedicated to just fielding these questions that are coming in through our global team of representatives, through our coaches. We have a call center based out of Massachusetts, through the different channels that students and agents can get in touch with us to try to make sure that that we are getting back to them in a timely manner. Because the way I look at it, the agent is the student, so to speak. So any question we're getting from an agent is a question we're getting from a student. The agent's interest will always be to address whatever concern the student has. So we've also made the choice to make sure that our partners, and we do have quite a few partners and quite a few students in the pipeline, but that they have access to us in one way or another. So our team of representatives around the world are hosting webinars for our agents on a regular basis. I told them to keep going until they were, drying up, essentially. And it seems like at this point, we've had enough of them where our agents are now saying, okay, we think we got it. We think we've got it covered. And if there is something else coming in, there is always a representative who can help them in the local language. So, it is, I think, I remember from being an agent that there were cases where we would receive no communication, as opposed to, someone honestly saying, I don't have the answer right now, I'll work on getting it back to you. I think the second scenario is always preferable, because no communication, you have no idea where anything is. You have no answer for the student. It's just not a good way of serving our students or our partners. So I think even saying, I don't know, I'll find out, is better than not saying anything at all.
Okay, brilliant. Duleep, if I can come to you with the next question that we've received from Stephanie at the University of Heidelberg, who asks, I've worked with agents to do webinars together with the feeling that it was very much a partnership. But she's saying that there are agents who are asking schools to pay to do webinars with them to their students. And how do we feel about that, about agents charging schools to join them on webinars to students?
Well, that's more of a personal question of how each person positions himself or herself in terms of as a business model. Maybe they're hurting, and that may be one decision as to why, or they're getting a lot of offers and they're trying to just sift through which ones are really serious. So that is a decision which I think she has to work out with each of the agents. There are many, I'm sure, who Heidelberg can afford in terms of if they can pay for such a service. But again, and again, as we've been emphasizing, this is about a partnership between the two sides, and both sides have to step up to try and see how best they can help each one out. And I think that is something that the two sides have to resolve amongst themselves, of what is in the larger interests and in the future. I mean, this is about continuity also.
Well,
you don't want
interesting to see how our industry may develop and change, and this is potentially an idea that that may become a common practice.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
For now, it may not be the case, but down the road it could be. But
right.
Yes.
Kirsten, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think it really depends on the market as well. There are markets where I typically wouldn't pay to participate in a webinar, and then there are markets where I would. And I think it comes down to how expensive it is to operate in that market, what the business model is. You know, I mean, what commission, you know, what we're paying also has an impact on that. But certainly, you know, markets are very, very different. In some markets, it may not be feasible to charge for a service like that, and in others, it's just common practice. So I think it all comes down to the market.
Yeah, and just to add to that, in terms of thinking of new ways of doing business, most U.S. institutions will spend significant dollars investing in digital marketing plans aimed at generating leads and converting those leads into enrolled students on the domestic front. And I think one of the reasons is most U.S. institutions have in-house staff and a level of familiarity with some of the various terms that we hear, geofencing and IP audience building and doing some of these retargeting and keyword searches. However, I think fewer institutions think about their agent partners as being potential opportunities. And I agree very much with what Kirsten said. It depends on the market, depends on the country, and it certainly depends. It has to be a real formidable relationship that's built on substance. But I think there's no reason why U.S. institutions shouldn't be turning to the right agent partners overseas and saying, let's talk digital marketing. I know that's very different than the fee for commission structure of paying for when a student enrolls, but saying, let's start talking about, my university's brand presence in your country or your city, and how I could potentially outsource and pay your organization to help us improve our digital presence.
Yeah, thank you.
That is very viable.
Thank you. I think we're about halfway through our hour slot, and I think it's time to have a look at the results of our first poll, which has been running for 20 minutes, and 50% of the audience has now voted. So I am going to just start closing that. If anyone wants to vote in the next couple of seconds, please do. But we have had 255 out of 500 vote, which makes sense if half of our audience is from agents. I'm going to end the poll now. And I'm going to share the results with everyone. So hopefully my panelists can see this poll as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so If we take the first question, does your agency expect to send students for this fall's intake? It's great to see that overriding majority thinks that they will be, but with a healthy percentage thinking that they will start by studying online. And I guess if we add the two yeses up, we get a pretty strong yes there. Guys, I'm wondering what your take is on that. Is that in line with what you've heard and what you're expecting for this fall?
You know, I just earlier today came out of a webinar that was hosted by IDP, where they were presenting some interesting data. And I think the numbers they were presenting were a little less encouraging in terms of students being willing to consider the online format. I know specifically for their data, most of it came out of India, so that could also be a market-specific trend. But I'm happy to hear that at least 25% of them are looking at the possibility of studying online, because certainly with no certain answers for the fall, some of the institutions in the US may be heading in that direction.
Yeah, and Kirsten, I think India may be a significant factor in that response, with I think the impression of online education currently tougher in India, perhaps. So, sorry, Bryan, do go ahead.
And then just thinking about that, I'd like to encourage the agents out in the network to really think very carefully about what is the definition of online learning. Because US institutions are figuring out these definitions, and they're not all equal. So of course you have a synchronous learning experience, you have an asynchronous experience. Lots of institutions are talking about a flipped classroom model. And so without getting into the definitions of all of these things, I know that your best intention is to place students, if the instruction is online, in the best fit. And so I think there's a lot of conversation and dialogue and education that needs to happen between US institutions and agents, so that agents understand exactly what is that online experience. If the institution that you're sending your student to, if their brand is built on personal attention, you better make sure that they're offering a synchronous experience where they're going to have live access to the faculty, and they're not going to just be expected to do reading and learning on their own. So just want to kind of provoke some thought in terms of finding that right fit. If it does come that online is the mode of instruction for fall or at any time in the future.
Yeah, if I can add over here, I was in a webinar last week where we were talking to students who were not going through agents, so they had been applying on their own, and they had admissions and everything. And the concern that majority of the students had was the resident experience opposed to an online experience. They wanted clarity on terms of when will they be able to go to campus, because their whole idea was to go to campus. And if that is taken away, then what is the objective or purpose of them continuing with this effort? And number two, what would the cost implication be? If it is going to move online, how do you address the cost issue when the most significant piece of their experience has been taken away? So I think those are the things that need to be massaged into these discussions. And that is why this clarity aspect has to be brought in. If you have your website and you have information, it's not just about the first page having, about what the issue is going to be. Every single school page has to address the same thing, so that when they go to the other pages, they're getting exactly the same messaging. So I think these are all the various things that need to be put into place as the agenda moves forward.
And I think to add to that, Duleep, I think a lot of institutions still haven't considered some of those issues yet, in terms of, is it fair to ask the same tuition from a course that was supposed to be online and it's now been moved on campus, and very clearly conveying to the agents, how does this impact OPT? Because that's one of the number one questions that we get. I think there is an assumption that if students start online, this will negatively impact their ability to do OPT and CPT. So institutions have to be very deliberate in how they're communicating that to their agents and students.
Brilliant. If we may, let's move on to the second question, which was multiple choice question. And I think my initial takeaway is that we still see that agents are telling us that travel, visa, and immigration issues are still by far the strongest issue, and quite a lot stronger than whether the medium of instruction is online versus classroom. And I guess for me, that's the takeaway of that poll. Now, Duleep, I know that this was a question that you were interested in seeing the results to. Does that tie in with what you were expecting?
Yes, very much, because whatever we may do at institutions and everything that we develop to address the student concerns and needs, the one thing which is outside our purview in a certain sense is the travel and visa and immigration aspect. I mean, we have no control over it at this moment. We are hoping that the collective effort on the part of various institutional presidents will hopefully influence the State Department, and then thereby, they'll find ways and means of conducting interviews and doing everything possible. But that would be, I would say, the first piece of the roadblock. And of course, the travel aspect, when travel opens up, how is it going to be? Are students supposed to get an additional certificate showing that they have gone through the COVID test or not? How will countries receiving these students, how will they be judging it? Will there be a quarantine period? So there are all these things that need to be spelled out. And this is outside the institutional purview. This is more at the governmental level. And so there has to be a strong dialogue between both the higher education, academia, and their counterparts at various, and I'm talking about all national governments, not just the US, but all the European governments and everybody else, as to how do we resolve this? Because that is going to be the first major roadblock before we can even think of everything else.
And I will say, behind the scenes at my institution and many other institutions, the three buzzwords that I think will continue to become part of all of our vernaculars are test, trace, and isolate. And I think to my earlier points about, many institutions really wanting to say we will open, we realize that we will be able to open providing that we're able to provide widespread testing, talk to students about tracing, and then really important, and I see some questions in the chat about this, is providing opportunities for isolation, meaning if a student does test positive, institutions will need to be able to communicate to our students and their families that we will provide them a very, very safe atmosphere. Well, they will be isolated, they'll have a private room, they'll have meals delivered to them, and they'll have members of a health services center come and take their temperature multiple times a day and really communicate that students are as safe, or in some ways even more safe, being on a college campus than they might be in their home setting.
Yeah. And Bryan, I almost feel like we could do a whole other hour's webinar talking to you about all of those scenarios, and certainly we'll have more questions to come. One in the next poll that I'd like to launch now, so that we still have time to get some good results, is the second round of polling questions, which are for the institutional representatives. So I'm going to launch that poll now, and for the panelists as well, you can actually respond to those questions too. So the first one, if your institution is expecting to make international budget cuts next year, will this have a direct negative impact on your ability to work with commission-based recruiters or agents? To give you some context, we speak to a lot of schools, and we have heard that there are some university leaders who are calling into question the costs associated with agents, perhaps not looking at the big picture of how this works, and perhaps because they do look at it in such a big picture, they see commissions as costs, and they perhaps don't look at the revenues that are being brought in ahead of those commissions. So that's something that I thought would be interesting to ask. Secondly, what is your institution currently planning for the start of the new academic year in September? And this is multiple choice, so resume on-campus programs, delay semester start, begin the semester with focus on online, or don't know. I think we should have removed don't know. It's not acceptable. But we will come back around to those. So I hope you guys can all have a vote on that. Bryan, if I could turn to you now again for a pretty straightforward question, but honing in on your agents. What could agents be doing today to help you, to alleviate your pain points, to make your life easier? Is there anything that you would expect from them at this point?
Yeah, I kind of hit on this a little bit before, but I'm really a big believer right now in sharing vision, and I think that's the first step then in creating some goals and then putting some strategies together to meet those goals. And I think for me, things have been moving very fast paced, but not too fast for me to take the time to get on the phone or to have an electronic chat with some of my most trusted partners. And I think it sounds so simple, but it's so powerful, the idea of listening. And, you know, I over the last month have, you know, 2 or 3 of really not even professional partners, but good friends who happen to be agents, and just really listening to the challenges that they're facing, the things that they're hearing from the students have been really, really valuable for me to help shape, you know, policies and decisions at my institution. So listening, shared vision, and I think the last thing too is I'm a big believer, I'll make a book recommendation, turning research into results, which is kind of the foundations of gap analysis. And so I think of knowledge, motivation, and organization. And so it's my responsibility and the agent's responsibility. We've got to share knowledge, we've got to understand each other's motivation, and then we've got to understand our organizations, our cultures, and some of the structures, policies, and procedures. And then, you know, for me, we've got to knock those barriers down so that there's a clear path for us to achieve our mutual goals. So that's a very big picture.
Thank you, Bryan. I'm not sure if anyone has anything way different to add to that, but if not, I will move on to the next question because we do have a lot of questions coming. Duleep, I know that you have a techie background, and so I'd like to ask you about the transition to online education and digital student recruitment even. Do you think that this situation today is having an effect on fast forwarding our move to online education and to digital student recruitment? Was that happening anyway? Is this fast forwarding it? What do you think the takeaways are for how this situation is affecting electronic digital at this point in time?
Yes, I mean, one needs to understand that the generation we are serving is very tech savvy. They live on their mobile devices, and that is what they expect in terms of engagement, communication, any kind of interaction. So in a certain sense, universities have been behind in terms of trying to reach out to these students and connecting with them. So we've got to kind of narrow that. And yes, if any one thing COVID has done is probably accelerate the same way it has accelerated the whole online education, you know, agenda. And so I feel that everything digital will play a very important role. Now, the most important thing is this is about understanding how digital is going to work, you know, the marketing side of it. It's not just about saying, okay, we are in the digital space. What are you going to do about it? You have to understand the marketing side of how you're going to take it, you know, out there into the market so that people are aware of it. If I can kind of rewind a little bit, it's when the first websites came up. Everybody had a website. You know, okay, what do you do with your website? And from the international perspective, the more bells and whistles you had on your website, it was challenging for the international student because they did not have the bandwidth to access all that. So it was a kind of a lost effort in terms of how beautiful your website was, but it was not reaching the population that you were intending it to. So I think those kinds of sensitivities have to be addressed as to how the local population, in this I'm focusing only on the international, in all the different markets, how are they navigating, how are they digesting the information, how are they receiving the information? And for them, it's, as I always talk about it, it's a 7-second generation. If in 7 seconds you cannot capture their attention, you've lost them. They have no interest in you. So you have to be, I mean, we've talked about being nimble, but you have to be also oriented towards the angle of understanding how you're going to drive your entire campaign and how effective and efficient you're going to make it.
So Duleep, if I can stay with you, you're again, you know, with your techie background, are you hearing rumors in your circles of new methods, new technologies? Are there any future predictions that you have for the industry that perhaps we haven't even seen yet that may be coming to us sooner because of this situation?
I think we will now see we will see a lot of young folks come out with a lot of different kinds of ideas in terms of startups and how they are planning to execute it. Yes, we will move towards a lot of visual engagement over different channels and, you know, different kinds of things that have been created of how this engagement will happen between institutions and agents, because the idea is to penetrate markets. When you look at our agent profile and where universities typically go even in their own recruitment efforts, the tendency is to go to the urban centers. So we have not penetrated many of these markets. So the idea is, yet at the same time, when you look at the profile of this age group that we are targeting, where are they located? They are all over the country in tier 2, tier 3 markets, and everybody has a dream. All these parents have ideas about what they would like their son or daughter to do. So I think that is where we have to start driving in terms of how vast the market is, but we have actually not scratched that surface. And I think this is where technology will truly allow us to kind of start going into those spaces which we had not even thought of, or our own efforts in terms of both our financial and human resources did not allow us to do it. And this is where, again, agents would play a very important role in terms of being the spokesperson or the person on the ground to make it happen. Because every now and then, they do want that fuzzy feeling of touching a person or meeting a person. And that is how an agent can serve as the last outpost for any institution as they are working with them.
Thank you, Duleep.
I just want to add on the technology front. I'm really interested in thinking about how 5G is going to change the world that we live in combined with COVID-19. And so if they say 5G is going to make a 45-minute MRI doable within 20 seconds, what will 5G do for higher education around the world? What will it do to the student-agent relationship? What will it do for the way in which students want to learn? And you juxtapose a national pandemic on top of that, where we're all going to be changed to rethink the way that we do things. And I think a decade from now, things are going to look and we're going to interact in a lot different way than we are now. That's obvious.
Okay. We've had about 10 minutes for our poll, and in the interest of time, I'm going to get to the results because we've got just over 5 to 10 minutes left. Guys on the panel, if there's anything that I haven't covered after we do this poll, please let me know if there's anything you wish to cover. Anyone sending questions in that are super important, send them in all capitals so that we notice them better. I'll press on with our poll results. So I'm going to end the polling now and share the results. So if your institution is looking to make budget cuts, will this have an impact on your work with agents? Lovely to see that most people say no, but also a third of people who responded. And just to say, we did again have about half of our audience respond. So I think that was a good number. And a third of those are feeling that it will impact their work with agents. I'll move on to the second one. What does your September look like? Well, I think with these multiple choice options, we always get a bit of an even spread, but it looks like beginning the semester with a focus on online delivery is slightly stronger than most. Okay, and again, so to the panel with both of those questions, has that raised any concerns, or is that pretty much in line with what you are expecting? Did you feel that a third of people would say that their work with agents would be threatened by this? Kirsten, I'm going to pick on you.
Could you repeat the question, Ian? I'm not sure I understood that.
So specifically regarding the first question, would you feel that it's surprising that a third of our respondents said that this situation would have a negative impact on their ability to work with agents in terms of budget?
Yeah, I'm actually surprised it's not higher, to be honest with you, because I still see, as I was preparing for the session, I was thinking about how quickly the US has had to move in terms of getting to a point of really, quote unquote, accepting agents, where, when I was working for the agent many years ago, Australia had already been doing this for a long time. A number of other countries had already been doing this for a long time, and the US has really had to try to run to catch up. So I'm glad to see that almost 80% feel like this will not negatively impact them, because I was concerned that would be one of the first things institutions might focus on. But then again, we have come a long way from 5 years ago, from 10 years ago. So this is definitely a positive indication for the future, I would say.
Brilliant. Anyone else want to comment on that first one?
I was a little surprised. I was not expecting the no to be that wonderful, but I'm glad. I think for everybody, what it is going to be is we will have to go back to making a case for international once again. again, it's a question of relevancy. It all depends on, institutions which have large numbers of international students will probably continue with that support. Those which have much smaller numbers and who are probably thinking of entering that space will probably rethink, is this what they really want to do? Or, will they still be competitive? So I think we will probably be going back and once again making a case as to why international is important to our institutional mission. And, because many times upper administration, does not truly understand, or they just see just certain things in terms of the numbers coming in, the revenue coming in, but they don't really want to get into the details of it. So it is time for us to be able to educate them of how this actually works and, what it is all about.
I just want to add a little bit from a time frame perspective. Really interesting in the United States, the national deposit deadline for most undergraduate institutions has been delayed from May 1st to June 1st. And most fiscal years in the United States end June 30th. And so we're at this very critical point right now where many institutions are looking at what the incoming enrolling class is going to be like, particularly at the undergraduate level. And you've seen in higher education, institutions are reducing hours of employees, putting employees on furloughs. But this summer, for the institutions that don't meet their revenue goals, there are going to be widespread layoffs that are going to extend well beyond just, international recruitment. So I'm with you on the mission piece, and I don't think many college administrators will argue on the value of international students. But in terms of making that value proposition and kind of generating that revenue, we've got to really come together as partners, institutions and agents now, because I think to that question about commissions or agents being cut, what's going to happen in the United States is going to be much bigger than that. The acceleration of institutions that simply go out of business is going to be pretty pronounced in the fall, and we're all going to have to respond to that.
Yeah. So, Bryan, if I can stick with you, how do you personally see the fall at your institution? Do you fall into one of those categories, or are you a bit of all of them?
Well, we're certainly looking at our students kind of holistically, which I hope is a theme that we all need to look at. And I think for those people who've heard me talk, I think there's a big connection to agents and institutions looking at the connection between US student recruitment and international student recruitment, both at the undergraduate and graduate level, and then also student retention, which I think is a big buzzword, for agents to be thinking about how could they partner with institutions to make sure that the students are going to retain. And so we are looking at that whole picture. We're projecting, I know as many institutions are, a scenario where we fall short by 10%, a scenario where we fall short by 25%, and a scenario by which we may fall short by as much as 50%. That's not just on the recruitment of new students, but the retention of our current students. And so we are calling on all of our partners, whether it be agent partners, whether it be vendors, whether it be technology firms, to be helping us with engaging our students. So I hope that answers your questions. I mean, that's how we're looking at it. But when push comes to shove, mid-June is going to come, and we're going to have a good sense of what our revenue situation is going to be. And if we're in that worst case scenario, then we will be here in the fall. I mean, we have a healthy endowment, we have a strong reputation, a small brand, but we're going to have to make some difficult choices to make sure that we could still fill our mission to our students in the fall.
Understood. Okay, and on that topic of offering classes online, this is a broad one, and apologies if we covered this a little bit already, but how are you, Kirsten and Bryan, geared up to pay commission when courses move online? And have you made a decision on what that looks like?
Yeah, I would say from our end, certainly like there's ongoing discussions about a variety of things, but I think the institution's attitude is that our partners should not be penalized for things that are beyond their control. Our agents have done the work. They have done a great job of getting students to us and keeping them in the pipeline. So I would hope that most institutions would go in the direction of opting to honor the commitment that they've made to their agents. And again, coming back to what I said before, understanding that these are extraordinary circumstances and we all have to stay in business one way or another. So I would hope everyone would be on the same page on that.
Bryan, is that similar for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit the nail right on the head. Yeah.
Okay. Now we are an hour in, and I'm not sure if my panelists have other places to go or be, but I have a few more questions. So if anyone has to leave, please, obviously we won't be offended. But I'll just keep going otherwise with a few more. One of the questions that we've had come in would be, would you advise a school that's struggling right now to cut back and ride out the storm, or to double up their efforts and be even more productive at this point in order to survive? And that's to the group. So I don't know if anyone wants to take that. It's a tough one, isn't it?
Yeah, and I don't know that there is a straightforward answer to that, because I think it really depends on what situation you're in. I mean, you know, there are institutions with very healthy endowments and who are kind of living in a different place on the line towards the edge. You know, some institutions, as Bryan mentioned before, will inevitably be impacted by this to the point where they will no longer exist. They're the ones I would consider being very close to the edge. And then there are other institutions, unfortunately Northeastern is one of them, where we're a little further back and in a pretty healthy position. So I think, you know, if you're scrambling for survival, you may have to make different decisions. And I don't know that you're in a position to necessarily innovate in a way that requires an investment. So I think that's a very, you know, long-winded way of saying it all depends.
Yeah.
We're trying to encourage our families. This is not a 1-year decision that you're making. This is you know, if you're in a master's, this is a 2 or 3 year decision, or if you're in an undergraduate program, this is a 4 or 5 year decision. So helping our families on the ground see the bigger picture. And I guess I would take that same theme to be thinking about strategies that institutions are trying to take. I would encourage, even if times are very, very challenging, which I know they are for many, to take a longer view and to think through what the decisions you make today will mean for your institutions 3, 4, 5 years down the line.
Thank you, Bryan. Okay, well, I will perhaps ask you just one more broader question to the group, and perhaps we could wrap up after that. One thing that we at ICEF have always told the schools that we work with is that you must try to separate yourself from all of your competitors, not to say the same things all the time, and give yourself a bit of a unique identity in your international recruitment, and that applies anytime. Given that things are so difficult right now, it's perhaps harder to do that, but also more important than ever to do that. Now, I wonder if you know, let's end things with as positive a spin as we can, but what positive things can we be doing at this time to separate ourselves from what our competitors are doing, what our competitors are, how they're reacting to this situation, and what opportunities are there in this current reality to actually excel and be better than other people in how we communicate and work with our agents and our international marketing. So that's a broad question, but hopefully spark some positive responses. Kirsten?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately a lot of it comes back to adaptability, you know, from all angles of this. You know, how willing are we to listen to what the students are looking for? You know, are we gonna, you know, are we going to somehow kind of try to lock them into an online course if they're saying this is not what they want to do? Or are we going to hold our agents to standard and regulations that were made during a time that was different? I think, you know, again, providing access for students and agents to ask questions and kind of keeping ourselves nimble to whatever extent that's possible. And that's not easy for all institutions, particularly larger institutions who have been doing things the same way for a very long time. But I'm reminded of, and I used to quote this a lot for my staff at SNHU, but I am reminded of the book Who Moved My Cheese, which is essentially about being willing to adapt to new circumstances. I think the sooner we get there and say, this is a new reality, and what is the marketplace looking for, and how do we adapt to that? I think the better off we all are.
Okay. Any other comments on that?
You know, I've reflected on this a little bit, and you know, the truth of the matter is no organization is going to be able to market their way through COVID-19. But putting my marketing hat on, I think about, you know, what is the key essence of a brand, and I think that is the unique promise that you make to your constituents. And for me, we've led campus-wide discussions about it's the personal attention and it's the relationships. And so, as overwhelming and as big as all of this feels, actually, I think my inspiring note to everyone is I encourage you to kind of dig deep and really get in touch with your roots. I think why we do what most of us do, and I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek. It's not what you do or how you do, but it's why you do what you do. And I think for me and many members of our team, it's about those relationships with the students and their parents. And when things feel so overwhelming, when things feel so hard to predict, which they are so hard to predict, I would encourage everyone to just roll up your sleeves and get to know your students and get to know their families. And like I said earlier, listen, build meaningful relationships. It's not about quantity at this point, it's about quality. And if you have a team of brand ambassadors who understand that why, and it's focused around something like building relationships and showing care and concern, I think, you know, that's my optimistic message. You know, we can do that for each other. We can care for people together.
Yeah, I agree completely. Duleep.
Let me just add over that. COVID has done something interesting. It kind of has leveled the playing field for everybody. You know, so it's no longer, you know, about what we used to be. You are now kind of, everybody's at the starting line, and each one is now creating a new identity which is going to be used from this point forward. And this was a comment which came from the webinar which I did with students in terms of, you know, the response, as pointing out what the other two panelists have also said, the response time taken by the institutions to their questions. And they were attracted to the institutions which responded to them immediately, even if they didn't have an answer. Even if they didn't have an answer, the fact was, we don't have an answer, we're working on it, but I will get back to you, and to stay connected with that student. And I think that is the one single thing which both of the panelists have emphasized, is to be able to adapt to it and to be able to provide that information, because we are all in this business for the student. This is about the student. If we can reach out to him or her and provide the information that they are looking for, that clarity, the frequency with which they're looking for, I think you'll be a lot further ahead in terms of the market. I mean, that is I would say this, so that is where the leveling of the playing field, where now you are kind of on your own. This is what you're going to do, and this is what you're going to make happen. That is the, you know, differentiator in a certain sense.
Brilliant. Thank you. Guys, are there any other comments or questions that you wish we'd covered at this point? We're 10 minutes over, but I want to give you a chance. Bryan, please. Just
one quick sentence, and full disclosure to the audience, ICEF has not paid me anything to say this, but I really do believe it from my heart. I mean, ICEF is such a terrific organization, and I would encourage people to really stay with the ICEF Monitor. This is the first webinar. I heard Ian talk about podcasts to come, but throughout my career, I've always relied on ICEF to provide a global perspective on what's happening in the market and a global perspective on how I could help my institution stand out against the peers. I was just reading an article in the Monitor about things that are happening in Canada. And I think, you know, there's just unique lenses and views that ICEF could provide to all of us, agents and institutions, that I would encourage you to stay informed, to feed that knowledge base through ICEF.
Thank you, Bryan. Very kind words. Kirsten, more kind words?
Oh, no, I was, yeah, well, always, of course. But I was also just going to say, hang in there, everyone. We'll get through this.
Yeah. Agreed. With positivity. Thank you. Speaking of Canada, Bryan, you know, this webinar was US focused to some degree. I think the rules and the lessons are general, but yes, we're a US panel. We will have a more Canada-centric webinar coming up quite soon, so please stay tuned for that. But for now, we're out of time, and we will leave it there. Thank you to my panel for joining us. It was a real pleasure to have you. Thank you for everyone who's tuned in. We really appreciate you tuning in and sending us all of those questions. On the note of all the questions, we received so many, they came in constantly thick and fast that it was impossible really to keep up with them. But we will try in some way to deal with them and get back to each and every one of those questions in some way, shape or form. So please look out for our communications on that. And please also look out, as I mentioned before, for our podcast due to be launched next Wednesday. It's called the ICEF Exchange. My colleague Tiffany Egler from the agency relations team at ICEF, she'll be speaking with some prominent agencies and getting opinions on the influx of the online learning programs that we're currently seeing in the market. So please keep up to date with that and follow us at ICEF Global on Instagram. And of course, icefmonitor.com if you're not already subscribed. It's our free news resource, and we really believe that there's excellent news for you all to be tuned into. So thank you for now. Thank you for all your comments, and thanks a lot for joining us, and we'll see you again soon. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.